Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the eTrailer base plate on a 2023 Jeep Wrangler. Now this is what your base plate is going to look like when it's installed on your Wrangler. And being the most popular flat-toed vehicle, there's a lot of different options when it comes to base plates. Some of them take a little bit more trimming than others, and this one does require some of the trimming, but overall I really like the way that this one sits against the bumper, and overall it's a really easy installation compared to some of the other ones that are out there. And although there is trimming required, you'll see that the only thing that's really popping out from this rock guard is going to be the receiver tube openings and our safety chain loops. So overall, it still sits a little bit further recessed than the bumper, so it's not very unsightly. And on a Jeep, it actually kind of adds a cool look to it, where other vehicles, it's not as cosmetically pleasing as that. But this one, not too bad. And it has a plastic cap for when you're driving around to keep any dust, dirt, and debris from building up in the base plate. But when you are ready to tow, super easy. You're just going to take the arms and rotate them in place until you can get those to drop in. You'll align those holes and then just put your pin in place. Now, again, with those different options of base plates, it really does come down to the mounting of the rest of the components. That definitely makes a big difference for the installation. Now, the installation of this one was very easy compared to a lot of the other ones, and none of them are terribly difficult on the Wranglers. It comes down to, again, getting your 6-pole bracket or your breakaway switch mounted up. And this one comes with a bracket that's kind of a universal one that they put in a lot of the kits, and you can make it work. I actually opted for just a slightly different bracket. You could make that one work with a little bit of modification, but what I ended up doing was just taking some spacers and then self-tapping it straight up where there is a metal tab for that to bite into, and then I just use a step bit to get our diode wiring to pass through, and it's pretty clean. I'm very happy overall with the way that it sits. Breakaway switch, I just cut a notch and then bent my tab down and self-tap that into the metal rock guard that's behind there. It's a nice mounting spot, and overall I'm really happy with the results. And as far as hooking up, this is a really easy base plate as well. Everything's right here. Now keep in mind, these ends are specific to Demco and eTrailer, so you don't necessarily have to get that tow bar to work with this base plate. Just make sure that whatever tow bar you have the ends to match that. So if you're buying a Roadmaster tow bar, just make sure that you have the eTrailer Demco style ends, and it's gonna hook up. Now before I hook up our tow bar, something that I want to point out is making sure that your tow bar is going to be level with your towed Jeep. And with this base plate, and this is a completely stock Wrangler, our tab height is coming in at 17 inches. So you're going to want to measure the height of the hitch pin hole on the RV receiver to make sure that it's within a 3-inch window. And if it's beyond that, you're going to want to take a look at a high-low adapter, and that way you can get your tow bar within that 3-inch window to make sure that it stays level and it's going to be a safer way to tow. And for instance, today we have a high-low adapter on our RV. This isn't their first time flat towing a vehicle, and they're probably used to making sure it's level, and so that's why they have a Blue Ox high-low adapter, which just simply drops that down, making our tow bar nice and level when we hook up. Now to hook up, pretty easy here. We'll just get our tow bar arms in place. Now something that I've learned today, we're always learning here at eTrailer, is we have a Blue Ox tow bar with Blue Ox ends. Now this one's definitely seen some miles and some enjoyment. It does work with this. So we'll get this pinned up. We'll get our safety cable crossed over and attached to our safety chain loop. It's super easy to gain access to it. Some of the other ones are pretty tucked back there. It's kind of a minor thing, but when you're hooking up quite often, it can get a little bit cumbersome. We'll get our other side in place as well. We'll get our diode wiring plugged in. When flat towing any vehicle, there's going to be 5 main components that are always going to be required. And the first one on the vehicle is going to be the base plate. That's going to structurally mount to the frame of the vehicle, creating a mounting point not only for the tow bar, but the rest of the components. The tow bar is going to be the connecting point between said base plate and the hitch on the RV. Now, just like a trailer, you're also going to have safety cables that will attach from the hitch on the RV to our base plate. We have our diode wiring, which is going to transmit light signals from the coach on the 7-way to the 6-pole on our vehicle and eventually to the tail lights, giving us our running lights, turn signals, and brake lights. We also have a braking system, and today we have a Blue Ox portable braking system, but whether it be a portable system or a fixed system, you're always going to have a breakaway cable, and this is in case everything was to fail, all of your connections failed, it's going to pull this cable, applying the brakes on the towed vehicle. That way it's not rolling down the highway. Now, when it comes to the installation of this base plate, I mentioned that it's really not too hard to do. There's a few things that I'm going to point out that maybe I'm not super happy with, but overall I think this is a great base plate. The things are, it's pretty tight here. We have a plastic skid plate or rock guard here, and it does push against it. It did make it a little bit tight to get everything in place, but obviously it was able to go back in without having to cut that. There's also templates included to get this cut out to make sure that it's open just enough for the arms. I found that I had to trim it out a little bit more, quite a few times, just to make sure that there's an ample space, as you are going to need to put that on at the same time as the bumper. But overall, this is a pretty easy one to do. You really don't need any special tools to do this, and you can knock this out in, I would say, just a few hours. So if this is something that's maybe beyond your skill set, that's not a big deal. Or if you don't have the space or tools to do it, you can use eTrailer's dealer network locator, and that way you can find someone close to your area to get this installed for you. But if this is a DIY project that you're willing to tackle, follow along with us and I'll make sure that you get this installed. To get our base plate installed, we're going to be removing the front bumper, and that way we can get everything bolted up. Now, throughout this whole process, you're more than likely going to be doing the rest of your flat toe components at the same time, and I highly recommend doing that because as the bumper is off, you'll be able to get all of your components mounted up and route all the wires nice and clean. It makes it a lot easier with that bumper off. So make sure, A, you have a place set up to set this off to the side for a bit. And also I recommend having a nice organized spot to keep any of the hardware that you take off. It'll make it that much easier to put everything back in place. Now to begin to take our bumper off, pretty easy here. We have 2 plastic push pins that are kind of inset, and you'll see that there's grooves on each side. So if you can, just take a flathead screwdriver and just kind of wedge that center portion. And once you get that top part pulled up, you should be able to get the whole thing out. If the bottom doesn't come with it, it separates. Just kind of lift up on this and that should help pop it out and just keep these together. So we'll get this one here and then this one over here. Now depending on which trim you have on your Wrangler, it might be slightly different, but it's going to be a similar concept of getting this rock guard taken down. It's just a series of plastic push pins. So there's one that's inset here. You can actually go from the back side with a trim panel tool or a flathead screwdriver. And this one's slightly different than the other plastic push pins. So let me get this out. I got the top portion out. We'll get that bottom. And you'll see it's just a little bit different, but it's actually, I think, easier to wedge underneath these. So we'll go ahead and continue along the bottom here, just getting these removed. Now there's also going to be 2 screws that go into a bumper support. These are going to be just 8mm screws. So we'll go ahead and get these taken out. Now once you get those screws out, we should be able to get this removed and we'll just set it aside. The bumper is attached to the frame of the vehicle. It has a series of studs that just bolt into brackets, and to gain access to them, they're just going to be on the back side. You're going to want an 18mm socket. There's going to be a total of 4 on each side, so we're going to get all 8 nuts removed. Now you may need an extension to get to some of these, just kind of by nature of the way that they're designed, but we'll go ahead and get these all taken down. And if it's your first time taking your bumper off, sometimes these will give you a little bit of a fight just because there's some thread lock on there. So I recommend loosening them up and then you can take some electric tools to it. But don't be surprised if you have to fight it a little bit. Now something you might want to do while underneath the vehicle to make it a little bit easier to pull the fascia off, our electrical connector for our fog lamps is right here on the passenger side. So we'll get this separated. We'll just push on this tab and pull the plug back. And that's just going to make it easier. That way you don't have to hold up the fascia or the bumper while unplugging this. So at this point, we're about ready to get this thing taken off. If you're following along with the instructions with this video, you might notice that they have you take off some bolts on brackets. I don't think that's quite necessary. It's a lot easier to actually take this off and then tackle those. It's kind of up to you, but I've found that it's a lot easier to get this out of the way. Now, to get your bumper off, the studs are mounted up to our tow hooks here, and so what I've found is if you grab the tow hooks and then kind of use that as leverage to pull back, you can kind of grab underneath to where they'll jostle out, and then from here you should be able to just slide this out. Now, sometimes the welds are not the best here on the bracket, so if you have to fight it, normally it's just tight tolerances, but it should come off fairly easily. So at this point, we'll take our bumper and set it aside. And those bolts I was talking about, they're going to be these ones on the outside of the frame. You're going to have a very similar bracket on the inside, but we're going to leave those. We're going to take the bolt off, and we will be using the bolt later on for installation, so keep that handy. The brackets we will not be using. So what I'll do here, I have a 16mm socket. I'll just loosen this up for now, and then you can just slide your bracket up and get this out of the way, and then we'll remove the rest of this bolt, and then we're just going to repeat on the other side. At this point, we need to grab the large washers included in the kit, and we're going to be taping those up in place to line up with those outer holes where that bracket originally was. Now, I do recommend I tape the front as well, just to really make sure these hold in place. Because you don't want these falling out as you're trying to align things up. And then once it's all taped up, you just grab a screwdriver, poke the hole through, and open that. We'll do that for all the outer holes, so there should be a total of 4. At this point, we're going to take our base plate and get it mounted up. So grab the 2 bolts that we removed from that outside bracket, because we'll be using those to get this to hold up in place. And speaking of that, they say to use a center punch. Because as we raise this up, it's going to go into these slots, and we want to hold that in place while getting our hardware in. What I've found is if you use a 3/8 extension, it's just about the perfect diameter. So if you don't have a center punch, you can use this. So I'll just kind of slide this up. And it might get a little tight here, so don't be surprised. And if it is giving you too much struggle trying to slide this in place, taking a dead blow and kind of knocking that up will help. But I kind of got that in place here. We'll just align that through the hole with that washer. And then with that 3/8 extension, I'll just put that on each side, and that's going to hold this in place for us. And then just be careful, it's going to want to tilt, but you can kind of hold that in place until we get this hole aligned with where our bracket was. And we're just going to loosely put our factory bolts in place here on both sides. At this point, we're going to leave those extensions in to kind of keep everything aligned, but we're going to get bolts passed through. You'll see there's a hex here, and that should be large enough for our serrated flange nut bolt to go into place. If not, you're going to want to drill that out or grind away so this can pass easily. And at this point, we're going to put some thread lock on our bolt. And then we have these nut plates, and you'll see that it's just a welded on nut. And this is going to slide. On the bottom here, there's an opening. And you may have to, this will take a little bit of patience. Sometimes it goes a little bit better than others. But as you kind of raise this in place, get those threads to be pretty well aligned with the hole, and then take your hardware and get that started. And we're going to be doing this on both sides. So we're not going to completely crank it down. We just want to get those threads started on there. And as I mentioned, just take your time here. It can get frustrating sometimes when it's all lined up and it's not starting, but we'll get it. And once you get it started, we're not going to completely tighten this down yet, but if you need to drive it in a little bit, a 19mm socket will accomplish that. Something else I'm going to do, once you get this started, these ones we never put the Loctite on. I'm going to go ahead, and that's fine. These are just temporarily there to kind of hold it in place. But we do want to make sure that we're putting thread lock on these. So I'm going to back these out, put that thread lock, and then loosely get those in place as well. Now I mentioned earlier that a lot of times you want to leave that fascia or the bumper off so you can run everything. Jeeps are a little bit different. Because you have access kind of behind this rock guard, it is worthwhile to get everything put back in place. And that's why we haven't torqued down our hardware on the base plate, because the bumper is going to slide into those new slots with those washers. And once it's all in place, that's when we'll torque it down. But something that gets interesting is this rock guard really doesn't go into place as far as sliding it over the base plate without kind of putting it all in one go. So with that being said, we are going to trim out our rock guard here. In the instruction manual, you're going to see that there's going to be a template that you can use. And measuring from the top down 1 7/8 inches is where you're going to want this line. And then this center line, you'll see that they have kind of dotted here. That's going to line up with this bump. And so make sure you have them on the proper side. And I just use painter's tape to kind of keep those in place. Now, if you want, you can use a drill bit and drill out each corner and then cut that out. If you have other cutting methods, I'm using a multi-tool here. It works really well to get those nice clean corners. You can use that as well. But either way, we're just going to go ahead and get this trimmed out. Once you get this cut out, obviously you're going to have some flashing here no matter what you use to cut it. So I recommend taking a file and just going through and getting all those burrs knocked down and clean up any edges that you may have. As always, when you cut a template, you do want to test fit it on the actual base plate. And I can see right away that I'm having a little bit of binding here where the safety chain loops extend. Now, something else on these, if you didn't go wide enough on the inside edges, there are these bolt heads that kind of can get in the way. So just making sure that you have it trimmed out wide enough and yet keeping it centered up is going to be key. So I think I'll just go and just take about 1/4 inch off on each side and then test fit it again and make sure that it goes on nice and easy. And something you can kind of use as a reference is those screws that mounted into the bottom here should get pretty close to aligning here. Sometimes you do have to bend these a little bit, but you're looking for it to at least kind of get back to that point or close to it. So cut as necessary. I'll go ahead and get mine trimmed out. So I ended up going about 1/4 inch wider and 1/4 inch taller across the whole length. And I'm really happy with this fitment because it slides on there nice and easy. And something else you'll have to consider is it's going to sit where this is going to be flat and bolt up to the bottom of the bumper. So just making sure that it sits nice and easy here. You're not binding up against any of the plastic. That's kind of what you're looking for. So at this point, just as we pulled it off, I think the best way to put these back in place is grab by the tow hooks and align it up. Now remember, you do have those washers there, so it may not line up perfectly without a little bit of wiggling to get this to pop into place. And what I use as a reference, those push pins up top, once those are aligned, generally you're in a pretty good shape to where it's in place. So I'll just kind of wiggle back and forth. And also make sure that plastic harness that we unplugged, just make sure that's not in the way and we're damaging that in the process. So let me get an eyes on mine just to be sure. And just to make sure that ours is out of the way, you're going to need to plug this in anyway. So if you want to get that snapped into place, and then again, just kind of jostle this around. And you may need to kind of give it a little bit of force, but moving it back and forth, up and down, we should be able to get this to drop in. And just a little hip check I think might help us out here. I was able to get this in place. It did just take a little bit of extra love. Those studs are real tight, and something that I've done on a lot of the Wranglers is it ends up being the inner mounts that sometimes are an issue, and you may see that when you have it off. Some of the welds are just a little bit off. The precision's just really not there. So I'll take a burr bit and just kind of burr those out, making them a little bit larger. It makes it super easy to slide the bumper back in place and get those studs passed through. It's not really going to cause any structural issues. But either way, once you get the bumper in place, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get all those nuts put on the studs and tighten those down just as we would, you know, getting the bumper back on. We can also put these plastic clips. As far as the air dam, still have it loose here. And I'm going to keep it that way because we haven't torqued down our hardware. And the reason being is because we needed this to go into place since it goes into the base plate. And now that we have the bumper in, once that's tightened, we can go ahead and torque our hardware. We're also going to be putting some safety cables, so that's kind of part of the reason we're leaving the air dam loose. So at this point, I'll get my plastic push pins in the top, and then I'll get the nuts put on the studs of the bumper. Now to get these in place, I found that using a 3-inch extension with a Deepwell 18 works really well on the inside ones. When you go to the outside, you're going to need probably a 6-inch extension, but that seems to work really well when getting those all snug down. I got all of our nuts in place. So the bumper is bolted in. We still have this air dam loose, and this is going to give us access to our hardware. So the ones that we put in the nut plate, that's going to require a 3/4 inch socket to get that snug down with the torque wrench. Torque settings are going to be found in the instruction manual. Just use the chart to figure out based off hardware and the exploded view to get that torque setting. And the same goes for that factory bolt. It doesn't designate exactly what the torque setting is, but if you take a look at that bolt, figure out what size that is, you can use that chart to get the torque setting. But either way, this is going to be important because obviously it's attaching the tow bar to the base plate of the vehicle. So you want to make sure that long term it's going to be tight enough to hold on the base plate, but also not too tight. You can actually put stress on the hardware, causing it to be, potentially damaged long term. So go through, we'll get those torqued down. So our safety cables, these are in last line of defense of if everything was to fail, all the hardware, these are going to attach the base plate to the frame of the vehicle. So what we're going to do here is our base plate's right behind this guard here. So I'm going to loop it through. You'll see, I'll pass this up here. Loop this through, and that's going to attach the base plate around this loop. And then from here, we're going to want to use our quick link to attach it to the part of the frame that's behind where the base plate is. So any of these really work out well. So with your quick link, you can go ahead and attach this. Now, what else? Other options too, if you really want, you could probably make 2 loops around here and use the quick link to attach to the same spot. They include 2 quick links per side. So really whatever works best for you to where it's securing it around the base plate, but also onto the frame works well. I'm actually pretty happy with this. So double looping it around, we're just going to use this spot here. And that way it's going to keep the cables away from the sway bars or anything that's moving. So we'll just loop that in and then tighten this down. If you have any excess that you want to make sure isn't just dangling around or jostling as you drive, you can go ahead and zip tie this all up. Again, it's just a last line of defense. So making sure that it doesn't rattle as you're driving, I think, is going to be important here. So I'll get this zip tied up, and then I'm going to repeat this same process on the other side. So with all of that in place, this is the final step to get our rock guard kind of put back up here. And the tabs where these originally bolt up to, it's very possible you may need to bend this down just a little bit to get that in place. But more importantly is the plastic push pins. You want this to sit flush in the bumper so you can get those in place. And mine it's close, but I can't get those to snap in. And part of that is this is going to have to be cut out more. So this is the 3rd time I've made those holes larger. So do not be surprised if you end up trimming yours out more. You can always cut off more. And with this loose, it's not too hard to come in here and notch that as necessary and then get that back up until it's a perfect fit. So that's what we're going to do. And if you're struggling with these, they can be tricky. I get that. Sometimes you can separate the bottom, press that in first, and that will kind of allow it to go in a little bit easier, and then take the center section and press it in. That'll lock it in. So whatever you need to do, just make sure you get these all back in place. So I ended up enlarging this bottom portion to have that clearance to be able to go up in place. And in fact, I'll give you a quick measurement just so you can utilize this same one. It may be slightly different on yours. I mean, all the base plates are essentially the same, but just certain fitment from vehicle to vehicle can be slightly different. So height-wise, we're looking right at 4 inches. And then width, it's about 5 1/4. I probably could have kept it a little bit tighter at 5. And that would have worked just fine. From the bottom, I'm going to go off of where this kind of bend starts to go. It's about 1 7/8, give or take. 2 inches kind of starts to go into that bended in portion. So hopefully this helps kind of get you a nice, easy measurement that you can do right out the gate. But again, you may need to trim as necessary. Now with all those plastic push pins in place, I just went ahead and bent my tabs a little bit to get these aligned and tightened down. And then once you're done, you can kind of bend that up. Now, something that I'm going to point out, and you might notice this when trying to get this all up in place, right here we have a little bit of stress, and that's where it's bumping up against the base plate on our skid plate, and that's kind of consistent on both sides. So if you're struggling, that's definitely going to be a trouble spot to kind of get this all aligned, to get everything back in place. Long term, I don't think it's going to cause any issue. Just know that when you're putting it up, you are going to have some rubbing here. And I wouldn't necessarily suggest cutting this out any more than you need to. It's still able to go back up, just something to kind of keep in mind. But with everything in place, at this point, you are ready to get all your components routed up and get the rest of your flat toe set up. What I recommend is the bracket that they give you for the 6-pole. I don't really think it's the best option for this. But as far as mounting, what you might want to do is where we put our plastic push pins in place, there's metal right above here, and that's going to give you a nice structural mounting point for the bracket. So if you use maybe some spacers to drop it down a little bit, and you might have to cut off the tabs just a little bit to get that to fit, that'll put that 6-pole bracket right here, and then you can use just either a hole saw or a step bit to run your wires through, and I think that's going to be a good option for your diode wiring as well as your breakaway switch. And that was a look at installation of the eTrailer base plate on a 2023 Jeep Wrangler.